whatever type of thinking that person was subjected to when they were younger. And in order to change these mentalities, like he said, a person has to have immense focus and immense desire that is triggered through goal orientation. You know, I was it really bugged my mind out in a good way. I was watching Joe Rogan's podcast, right? And he had this neuroscientist on there, and he was explaining he was explaining a lot about the brain and how the brain works, right? And some of the stuff that he was saying was like aha moments and stuff that we talk about all the time. So you remember, I didn't really get to record it, but you remember last time when I was talking about how, for example, all these things that have been going on in the public about the rioting and minorities feeling like they're oppressed and at a disadvantaged point in history. And I was having a conversation with this older gentleman who, when I was asking him questions and talking to him, I was just letting him speak, because my job during that time, I liked him as a person, and he was smart, and he was a guy who did like 40 years in the military. He was a colonel in the military. I mean, that's high rank. And started another government job to double dip, get 2 retirements. So I really respected him as a person. So I just wanted to hear what he had to say.
Right.
It's high. That is a high level. And this guy has crazy respect when he's like low 50s. He's like late 50s, early 60s. And this guy has ridiculous respect when he addresses every single person as sir or ma'am. Everybody, all the time, all day. Oh, yeah, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I could do that. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, I will.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
yes,
like
sir.
that.
Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. No
No
problem.
matter how high his rank is.
No matter how high or who it is or what the age.
Good.
He says, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. No questions asked, nothing. And even when he starts getting upset a little bit sometimes, he'll be like, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm just giving my point. You know what I'm saying, sir? And I definitely want to hear your point also, sir. So let me hear your point too, sir. I mean, he's just the respect level. You know that he was in some type of
That's
job.
The ultimate level. You got to give respect to earn it.
Yeah.
That whole thing. Obviously, I would respect a person like that high just because he's giving it out so hard. You have no choice but to respect him.
Yeah, you have no choice. So even though he was getting into a conversation that I had disagreement with him about, I just wanted to hear what he had to say, and I wanted to hear what he had to say with him just letting it all out without me interrupting or chopping him up. You know what I mean? Because it wasn't like this. If I'm doing a podcast with somebody and they're saying something that I know or believe to be wrong, then I'm going to challenge it, right? You're not going to be on Joe Rogan's podcast and he's not going to challenge you, right? But in this particular conversation, I was just letting the person go without challenge, just so I could just really let him open up. So long story short, he's talking about it, right? He's talking about how nowadays and the current environment of minorities and the protesting, that he believes that minorities are still at a disadvantaged point, and that's why there's still a lot of problems and issues on how black people, minorities are treated unfair in America. And like I said, he started to talk about his past, on how this is an older gentleman. So he talked about as a child how he was able to see and witnessed segregation. He lived through it. So throughout listening to him, it's made me realize that, okay, him as an individual, segregation is not his. Segregation is his life, right? It's not history to him. It's his past, his actual past that he lived through. For us, it's just history. We never lived through segregation, right? We can only read about it in books, right? So to us, it's only history that you read through in books. For him, it's not history you read in books. It's his life. So right. So I remember we talked about this before, and my conclusion was, an individual like him, you're not going to be able to change his mind with things that are going on now. Because throughout him talking, I even asked him, I said, well, would you agree things today are better than they were in the past? And he said, oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I said, because you just said that you witnessed segregation and you went to a mixed school when they first started integrating, and white people used to ask you, well, what are you doing at this school? Because they had just started integrating, right? Wow. That's a harsh reality, right? That's a harsh. We never had to experience that, right?
Yeah.
You know, even if you were a person like us when we were younger, that you might have went to an all white school, not all white, but a majority white school, they never look at you like, well, what are you doing here? Because it's not foreign. Right. You know what I mean? So, so long story short, to him it was his past. So when I asked him, are things better now than they were in the past? And he said, absolutely, absolutely. And I said, will you agree minorities have a lot more opportunity than they did in the past? You know, and then I explained to him, I said, there's a speaker named by the name of Eric Thomas, who actually says his idol is Martin Luther King Jr., but he knows that he's 10 times richer than Martin Luther King Jr. was. And he said, because of the fact that back then you couldn't make millions of dollars as a black person, even being as profound as Martin Luther King Jr. was. But Eric Thomas said, me, in this current day, and the way things are economically, I could become a millionaire for being half the man Martin Luther King Jr. is. So he said, absolutely. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I said, even basketball players, how they could be millionaires by bouncing the ball. And he was like, oh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So while he agreed with those 2 points, he still went on to say, black people are oppressed, black people are this, black. So my conclusion was that no matter how good things are for minorities, no matter how great they have become, or no matter how much better they will be in the future, he's not going to let go of that systemic psychological wound that he has gone through throughout his whole life, right? His life, his mind has been made up very early in life, and you're not going to change it even if it is different, right? He has a specific viewpoint of life, and that's it. So when I was listening to the podcast with Joe Rogan, he was having a talk with forgot this guy's name. It's a neuroscientist. Damn, I forget his name. I think it's episode 1513, and this neuroscience, his last name is Hammerman or something, David Hammerman or something like that, and he was talking about neurological plasticity in the brain, and throughout development as an individual, a lot of our decisions, our ways of thinking, and our habits are due to our neuroplasticity, right? And they went to a lot of different viewpoints about neuroplasticity, right? When it comes to working out, motivation, ways of thinking, politics, all these different things. So one of the things he said that relates to what I was just talking about is that children are very, the neuroplasticity in children is very flexible, right? And as like which makes children very malleable, right? The whole purpose of a child is to have rapid learning. So their brain is very, very flexible in neuroplasticity, so it can change and learn and evolve and create, right? So when you become an adult, those chemicals in your brain that cause your brain to have neuroplasticity and be able to change and adapt and to learn, they turn off. They turn off. And they actually go into a remission mode to where you can't really access them anymore. Right? And really quick, so Joe Rogan asked him, well, why did your brain do that? And he said, well, really, to just be bluntly honest, the purpose of evolution, which I've talked about in different points, is the purpose of us is to reproduce, protect our kin, and die and move on. Right? And if you look at that with other creatures like ants, all ants do is work, reproduce, protect each other, and move on. And that's what we're supposed to do as people also. The only purpose we have is to reproduce. Like, so when people say, oh, like, I don't want to segue off too much, but when like young girls and young millennials of this day and age say, oh, I don't really want to get married or have a wife or anything like that or have a relationship, it's the stupidest thing in the world, and you can't have a life of happiness if you have that mentality, because the only purpose of us is to have a relationship, be a father, and have a wife or a husband. It really is the only purpose. Having money, having money and shit like that, it has no purpose. It only has purpose because we give it purpose. It's really just us having something fun to do with our time. You know what I'm saying? It really has. What's the purpose of building a business, building money, and building finances, and building people? It really has no purpose. The only purpose is to be in a relationship and have relationships with each other and populate and grow as a species, and that's it, really.
The simplest form, yeah.
Simplest. In a scientific form. So going back, he said that is how the brain functions. It's actually wired through evolution for that. So when you're young, you have the potential to grow a lot. But as you're an adult, your brain is set up in a way to where you just do what you learn and continue life like that, and you die. So moving back to the point I had earlier, it clicked in my brain once he described that, because it made me realize that, as we know, from the ages of 6 to 8 through 13 to 14 is when the most important period of time through your learning, and it will dictate how you generally are as an adult through that phase. So if he as a child developed a specific way of learning, specific habits that were detrimental to him, his way of life throughout that period of time is permanent. It's permanent. So even though the world has changed completely, and he can admit opportunities are different, minorities have more opportunities than ever before, the world is less racist, America is less racist, and it's less prejudice than it ever was before. Black people have more opportunities than ever before. He's a colonel. He was a colonel, retired, very high position in the military, very privileged, that minorities would have never been able to do during that time. And he will agree with that. But his brain is permanently engraved to believe it doesn't matter that has changed. My brain is not going to allow me to believe that America is not racist, or white people don't oppress us, or white people are not racist. I'm not going to let go of that ideology. It's ingrained with me. And it's so deep to a point where it's neurological. It's like it's neurological. It's in his chemical makeup. His chemical structure that he's programmed in his brain will not allow him to believe anything different. So when it comes to that, I thought about that, and it made me think about a wider viewpoint of when it comes to politics, or when it comes to all ways of thinking, people are programmed to think a specific way. And if you have a person, for example, who's grown up believing that those different things that we talked about, like black people are at a disadvantage, or here we go, people who are commonly socialists, right? They'll talk like their ideologies are like rich people are bad, right? People who are rich, their only job is they take advantage of people, they take advantage of workers, and workers are nothing more than slaves, right? And rich people are the elitists and they get money unfairly, and we need to have a government that gives money to people so that somehow all people don't have to struggle in life, right? That mentality is based upon whatever type of thinking that person was subjected to when they were younger. And in order to change these mentalities, like he said, a person has to have immense focus and immense desire that is triggered through goal orientation, which Jordan Peterson talks about, right? You can't be happy in life without goals, right? And he talks about that too, because that's neurologically how the brain is. So in order for a person to change that mentality, they have to have like fierce focus and goal orientation towards a different ideology. Otherwise, they won't change, right? Another point to that, where he said an adult can change their neuroplasticity, right? It's hard for an adult to change their neuroplasticity. They can change their neuroplasticity if it requires them to survive. Remember I talked about this? You asked me this before, like, how is it that you have like rich liberals, for example, who hate conservatives, but in order to be a rich liberal, you have to have conservative ideologies to get there, right? You're not going to become rich paying 60% of all your money to taxes, or 80% of or 80% of all your money to taxes, or 90%. Right. But yet these liberals will preach that is a good thing. But you can't become rich that way, right? So they'll have conservative habits, but they'll be so you remember you asked me that before, and I remember telling you that from my understanding, which wasn't necessarily on a neurological base, but it was on a social base, that these people never had to think in a way that didn't allow them to be privileged. They were able to keep a privileged mentality, or keep the negative, systemic negative behaviors mentality wise that they have, and still become successful. Like, for example, I hate to bring him up, but like LeBron James, right? You can't, even though LeBron James, we could say, is a good person, it's hard to take any advice from him, because it is what it is. Besides, he might have had to go through some struggles as a child with living in Ohio, but after he became successful, he never had to think in a tough way, because he never lived a tough life after that. After he got a $90 million check at 18 years old from Nike, you never have to think in a way that a person does who's living on the street homeless, who has to figure out how to make $1, take that $1, make it into $2, take the $2 and make it into $3. You had a $90 million check at 18, so your way of life is thinking from whatever privileged way of thinking that you had previously. So a lot of people, for example, like celebrity, that's why celebrities and athletes are the worst poster childs for these different radical movements, because that's why a lot of people say like these athletes are idiots, or these celebrities are idiots, like, because a lot of them don't come from places of intellect. They're people who have a high multi-million dollar jobs, and they become rich off of that. They didn't become rich off of necessarily grinding like Andrew Carnegie, who was absolutely dirt poor, who had let one penny to his name and became rich off of taking $1 into $2. You know what I mean? It's not the same thing. So not to get too deep, long story short, but they did an experiment where for example, and this reminded me of this reminded me of like learned hopelessness, the opposite of learned hopelessness, where if a dog, for example, they did a study on a dog, like if a dog's plasticity in his brain was at an adult's age in a dog, where their plasticity was like an adult, where it doesn't change that much. It can change if that dog or that person had to change in order to survive. So if I'm poor and I have negative ways of thinking and I need to survive, I can change my mentality to adapt in a way that will allow me to survive. But if you're privileged rich, you don't need to change your mentality in a way that's beneficial for you or society, because your way of thinking doesn't have to change in order for you to survive, right? So that made me realize a lot of different things from listening to that, and a lot of those ideologies it's on a neurological level. So when it comes to like when people believe in socialism, or they have negative ways of thinking or negative ideologies, it's at the core level neurologically with them. And like, you know, I mean, we've seen it. Like, how many times we go somewhere and people are just Dunning-Kruger. They are just Dunning-Kruger like shit. And they can't even help it. They just believe in the most ridiculous ideologies possible, and you can't change their mind. You can give facts. You can say, well, you can deductive reasoning them. Is this way? Yes, it is. Well, is this way? Yes, it is. Well, is it conclusive that this and this equals this? No, it doesn't. It's different. It's different.
Yeah. I mean, that kernel that you're talking about might have a little bit of that. So,
yes.
Listening to say, for him to go to segregation as a child and experience that, obviously that's a lot. But for him to overcome that and become a prominent figure in the military, which a colonel, I think, supervises a base, like 5,000 employees. So it means everywhere you're going, you're getting saluted. To be that high, you're getting saluted every time you walk in the hallway.
Right.
Because you're like the highest ranking on a, you know what I'm saying, typically on a base, basically run a base. But I will say, based on what we know from the human mind, when you go through a traumatic experience, that's why you're right. You can't take what he says. For him to go through a traumatic experience as a child, he's never going to forget that, because you cannot tell a human to forget a traumatic experience. You're asking too much for him to just say, just get rid of that. It's gone. Segregation's gone. It's never happening. He has a traumatic experience that he cannot move from.
No.
So to say, once he experiences, it's over. This is why when you were talking about Child's having that neurological
neuroplasticity. Yeah.
It makes sense, because you would never see a child go, wow, that child's set in his ways. But you will tell a grown man, a grown adult or woman that's older, they're set in their ways, because it makes sense for you to say that they lose that plasticity over time. Makes sense, because a child never is set in their ways. Yeah. We have never met a child, or you'll see a child go, that child is set in their ways. It's no hope. It's set. Makes sense, because the ability to learn and to develop as a child is basically whatever you're exposed to.
Yes.
Essentially.
Yes.
So,
and people had a problem with me when it comes to like slavery and this and that. I've had conversations with like other minorities about slavery and what, and I told them that I'm not going to teach my kids about slavery. Oh, why wouldn't you tell them about slavery? It's history. I said, because racism is learned. Racism
100%.
is learned. So if you have a white kid and a black kid in a room together and their children, they're just going to play toys together. They're not going to think about, oh, well, I'm a black kid and he's white, so back in the day in history, we were slaves, so I can't like him as a... Kids don't think like that. They just see toys and they see another kid and they just want to play. They just want to play. So I would have to teach my child that it's not okay to like the white kid, because of the fact that in our family, my grandmother, my great grandmother, who actually picked cotton. My grandmother witnessed my great grandmother pick cotton. So they've witnessed that in life, right? So, and that's where my last name comes from, right? It's slave name, right? So it is in my family. But I've never witnessed it. But in order for my child to have that type of negative behavior towards other white people because of what was done in slavery, I have to teach it to them. It has to be taught to them. So I'm not going to carry on that negative behavior of teaching it to him. Maybe some point down the line when he's older, 18, 19, 20, and his brain is less malleable to ridiculous things, when he already starts getting knowledge and learning facts from right and wrong, then I'll let him figure it out. Let him figure it out. But I don't need
that. Have awareness.
Yeah.
Just awareness.
But there's no reason to teach that. There's no reason to teach that.
I agree, 100%. It's sad that you could be so accomplished in an extreme traumatic event can make you not see what's in front of you and see the privilege or the accomplishment you have, what you went through. And we have to get better too, because I feel like when we get older, it is what it is. You get stuck in your way. Oh, you can't do it that way. This is how it's done. And we deal with older people, even in the type of business ventures we deal with, that you have people tell us, why are you doing it that way? You should be doing it this way. This is the way you should be done. Because it's the only way they know how to do it, and they're not very adaptable to change, which makes sense. So, I mean, when you get super old, like my grandmother, when she moved, imagine being in your 70s and moving to a whole new city. Asking a younger teenager, a young adolescent or adult to move to another city, it's easy because it's they're more acceptable to change. Having a 70-year-old move from a location they've been for 20 years and then just move to a whole nother city is a lot harder on a person that age because of the fact that they don't want to learn. You just want to kind of ride and die. Hate to say it that blunt, but you pretty much want to be set and just get ready to die, not 75 years old trying to learn a whole bunch of new things. Right. I actually, on one hand, see a problem. On the other hand, I understand why older people don't want to be open to change. To be super old and want to be able to adapt to new ways of thinking is a little hard for somebody is that old. Not saying it's right, but I can see it being difficult. There's got to be a reason. It's not be a survival thing. It must have to be a survival thing or something to be older and not have to put yourself in new area, new things, just a whole bunch of exposure to new things. It cannot be good on a person getting ready to be in their deathbed. I mean, I imagine it would be a little stressful.
No, absolutely. And
right? I mean, it would probably be stressful.
No, absolutely. You're set in your ways.
Yeah.
You're set in your ways.
I think we all will. I think at one point we all will eventually get set in our ways eventually to a certain extent when we get super elderly.
Yeah, when we get elderly. Because I believe me and you, when he got deeper, he started saying, Rogan was asking, well, how do you, as an adult, even though the neuroplasticity, the way the chemicals move in the brain and the neuroplasticity changes and it's harder for adults to learn new things, how do you kind of what's the cheat code to changing this? And I went over it before, and it says immense focus, and some immense focus and two other things, but focus was the main one.
Who would be a good example of that?
So again, for example, goal orientation, immense focus and goal orientation. So we do this all the time. So for example, when it comes to me, you know how with me that I'm just ridiculously I'm just obsessed with just information. I'm just obsessed, right? So that has to do with the fact that I've programmed the chemicals in my brain to have very fluid neuroplasticity. I'm addicted to that, right? So, and what happens when you have this high amount of neuroplasticity, according to him, you're having other chemicals in your brain being used. And these chemicals in your brain are also helping to release dopamine, which is a good feeling drug, right? It's a good feeling chemical in the brain. So when you are learning new things and you are goal orientated and you are completing these goals, this dopamine and this neuroplasticity is always being acted. It's always being acted. So the fact that we're always striving for goals and always completing them, and then when we're done, we pop a ball and mow, and we're just on to the next. We are currently always stretching out. We're stretching out that neuroplasticity, right? So also what I noticed, and it wasn't something he said, but with that, from taking from what he said compared to Jordan Peterson, who's used those similar objectives and psychological points, is again, people who don't have goals and who are not motivated are usually people who are not happy. And even Jordan Peterson said it's neurological. For what I'm seeing with him, it's neurological. So when people don't have goals, they're pissed off all the time. They have very low neuroplasticity, so they can't learn new things, right? So you can't learn new things. So hopefully you're smart at that point and not dumb, so that even if you're not learning new things, you are smart and you have a lot of knowledge. But these people usually have low intellect. Their ability to learn new things is low. They have low goals and or not very goal orientated at all. So because they have low goals, they're not getting a lot of dopamine in their brain, so they're very unhappy. So all of these things are wrapped around negative habits.
Yes. These are the most
Yes.
people we know.
Yes.
You know, it's funny you saying that and not having something like goals made me think like people that are very goal oriented are not very negative people. We don't have time. We're so focused on grinding and trying to accomplish a task and going from point A to B all the time, that in between point A to B, you got all this negative stuff going around you. You don't see it.
Yeah.
You essentially don't see it. Where if you don't have a goal, your point A is just you just see everything surrounding you. I can see why a lot of people that aren't goal or are very unhappy and negative.
Yes.
Because I've never met some people, at least the people I'm around, that are very positive and trying to be successful, are very positive people in general.
Yes.
In general.
Absolutely. 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 You know, and it's funny because we've known these things, like, and I've talked about them with you, and we talk about them all the time. And it's like we've known these things from like a Gary Vee perspective, which is like the non-science way of it, but you know the way people should be, but not in a scientific way. But then to hear a scientist basically talk about how scientifically these habits are essential, it just reiterates. It just backs up everything. Did you enjoy that clip? Well, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Catch most episodes on iTunes, Spotify, or any other podcast platform. Become an exclusive member and get full episodes and bonus episodes on patreon.com/AR Media Institute. Stick around for more videos on this channel. See you there, YouTubers.